Deep in the Amazon rainforest, where satellites can't track you and civilization feels like a myth, Dr. Elena Vasquez crouched beside an ancient mahogany tree, her grandfather's final words echoing in her mind. The rusted chest buried beneath decades of jungle growth wasn't supposed to exist. According to every historical record, it had been lost in 1943. But Elena wasn't just any archaeologist. She was a former Special Forces medic turned jungle survival expert, someone who did spent 15 years running from a past that had finally caught up with her. The men hunting her weren't treasure seekers or common thieves. They were the same shadow organization that had murdered her parents 20 years ago, and now they wanted what her grandfather had protected his entire life. As she brushed away the last of the earth, revealing intricate carvings that matched the symbols on her grandfather's map, Elena realized the chest wasn't just a family heirloom. Inside lay evidence that could topple governments and rewrite everything the world believed about World War II. But what secret was worth killing 3 generations of her family to protect? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Elena's hands trembled as she traced the symbols carved into the chest's weathered surface. Each marking was identical to those her grandfather had sketched on the back of an old photograph 3 months ago, moments before the machines in his hospital room had fallen silent. "It's yours now," he had whispered, pressing the crumpled map into her palm with fingers that still bore the calluses of a life spent hiding in plain sight. The humid air pressed against her skin like a living thing, carrying the scent of decay and new growth that defined this remote corner of the Peruvian Amazon. Somewhere in the canopy above, a howler monkey's call pierced the green twilight, a sound that would have terrified most people. To Elena, it was just another voice in the symphony of survival she'd learned to read like sheet music during her years as a combat medic in Afghanistan, and later during her self-imposed exile in these very jungles. She pulled out her grandfather's photograph, the only picture she'd ever seen of him as a young man. In it, he stood beside a woman Elena didn't recognize, both of them wearing clothes that belonged to the 1940s. Behind them loomed the same mahogany tree she now sheltered beneath, unmistakable despite the decades that had transformed the surrounding landscape. But it was what her grandfather held in the photograph that made Elena's pulse quicken, a key, ornate and clearly old, its metal catching the light in a way that suggested it was far more valuable than its simple appearance indicated. A branch snapped somewhere in the distance, too heavy to be an animal. Elena's military training kicked in instantly, her body moving into a crouch as she scanned the verdant maze around her. The men who had killed her parents in that staged car accident weren't the type to give up easily. They had spent 2 decades waiting for her grandfather to reveal the chest's location, and now that he was gone, Elena was their only lead. She pulled out the small field shovel she'd carried through 3 continents and began working more quickly. The chest was larger than she'd expected, nearly 2 feet wide and bound with metal straps that had somehow resisted the jungle's relentless appetite for decay. As she cleared more soil away, Elena could see that the entire container had been wrapped in what looked like oiled leather before burial. Her grandfather's methodical mind at work, even in what must have been desperate circumstances. Another sound, closer this time, the distinctive whisper of fabric against leaves that meant human movement. Elena estimated she had perhaps 10 minutes before whoever was tracking her would close the distance. Her grandfather's warnings echoed in her memory. "They have resources you cannot imagine, Mija. Government connections, unlimited funding, and the patience of fanatics. They believe what's in that chest belongs to them, and they will kill anyone who stands in their way." The final shovelful of earth came away, revealing the chest in its entirety. It was beautiful in its simplicity, carved from what appeared to be ebony and reinforced with metalwork that spoke of European craftsmanship. But it was the lock that made Elena's breath catch, an intricate mechanism that perfectly matched the key in her grandfather's photograph. She reached into her pack and withdrew the key, which she now wore on a chain around her neck. Her grandfather had hidden it inside a hollowed-out book in his apartment, along with a letter written in his careful handwriting. The truth about Operation Bernhard was never meant to stay buried forever. But some secrets are too dangerous for the wrong people to possess. You are the only one I trust to decide what the world deserves to know. Elena had researched Operation Bernhard extensively in the weeks following her grandfather's death. The Nazi counterfeiting operation had been one of the war's most ambitious economic warfare schemes, designed to destabilize Allied currencies by flooding them with perfect forgeries. But according to every historical account, the operation had been shut down before it could succeed. Now, as she inserted the key into the lock, Elena realized her grandfather had been guarding evidence, that those historical accounts were lies. The map felt like it was burning a hole through Maya's backpack as she navigated the crowded Sao Paulo airport. 3 days had passed since her grandfather's funeral, and she still couldn't shake the weight of his final words. The ancient parchment, carefully wrapped in protective plastic, contained markings that defied everything she knew about South American cartography. She'd spent hours researching the symbols online, cross-referencing them with historical databases and indigenous artwork. Most yielded nothing, but one particular marking, a serpent coiled around what looked like a cross, had appeared in a single academic paper about pre-Columbian artifacts. The paper's author, Dr. Elena Vasquez, worked at the University of Sao Paulo's Department of Archaeology. Maya's hands trembled slightly as she dialed the number she'd memorized. After several transfers, a crisp voice answered in accented English. "Dr. Vasquez speaking." "Dr. Vasquez, my name is Maya Chen. I'm calling about your research on pre-Columbian symbolism. I have something I think you should see." The silence stretched long enough that Maya wondered if the call had dropped. When Dr. Vasquez finally spoke, her tone had shifted from professional courtesy to sharp interest. "Where are you calling from, Miss Chen?" "I'm actually in Sao Paulo. I flew in from San Francisco yesterday." "I see. And what exactly do you have?" Maya hesitated. Her grandfather's paranoid warnings echoed in her mind, but she needed answers. "A map, with symbols that match some of the imagery in your paper about the Serpent Brotherhood." Another pause. "Miss Chen, I think we should meet, but not here at the university. Do you know Café Tortuga in the Villa Madalena district? I can find it." "Good. 1 hour. Come alone, and bring whatever you have with you." The line went dead, leaving Maya staring at her phone. Something in the professor's voice had changed when she mentioned the Serpent Brotherhood, a tension that suggested this was more than academic curiosity. Villa Madalena buzzed with afternoon energy as Maya made her way through narrow streets lined with colorful graffiti and bustling cafes. She found Café Tortuga tucked between a vintage clothing store and a small gallery, its interior dim and filled with the rich aroma of Brazilian coffee. Dr. Vasquez wasn't hard to spot. A woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back severely, she sat at a corner table with clear sightlines to both the entrance and back exit. Her dark eyes tracked Maya's approach with an intensity that made her feel like a specimen under a microscope. "Miss Chen." The professor gestured to the seat across from her. "You mentioned my paper. That research was published in a very obscure journal. Few people have read it." Maya settled into her chair, acutely aware of the backpack containing the map. "My grandfather died last week. He left me something, and I've been trying to understand what it means." "Your grandfather's name?" "James Chen. Though I don't think that was always his name." Dr. Vasquez's expression sharpened. "Describe him." "Tall, even in his 80s. Scars on his hands that he never explained. He spoke Portuguese and Spanish fluently, but claimed he'd never left California." Maya paused, and he was terrified of something, right up until the end. The professor leaned forward. "Miss Chen, I'm going to tell you something that may sound impossible. The Serpent Brotherhood wasn't just a pre-Columbian religious sect. It was a secret society that survived the Spanish conquest, operating in the shadows for centuries. They were guardians of something valuable enough that people have killed for it as recently as last month." Maya's blood chilled. "Last month?" "A colleague of mine in Manaus was murdered, Professor Roberto Santos. He'd been researching the same symbols I study, trying to piece together fragments of what the Brotherhood protected. Dr. Vasquez's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Before he died, he sent me a message saying he'd found evidence that one of the original maps still existed. With shaking hands, Maya pulled out the wrapped parchment. Is this what he was looking for? Dr. Vasquez's eyes widened as Maya carefully unfolded the map. The professor's breath caught when she saw the intricate markings, the serpent symbols, and the route that snaked deep into the Amazon basin. Deus mea, she whispered. This is authentic. Do you understand what you're carrying? I'm starting to realize I don't understand anything. This map leads to something the Brotherhood died to protect, something powerful enough that modern-day treasure hunters and government agents are still searching for it. Dr. Vasquez looked up from the map, her expression grave. Miss Chen, your grandfather wasn't just afraid. He was right to be afraid. If the wrong people know you have this... She didn't need to finish the sentence. Maya could see the truth written in the professor's frightened eyes. Whatever her grandfather had protected all these years, it had cost him everything. His identity, his homeland, possibly even his family's safety. And now that burden had passed to her. The humidity hit Maya like a wall the moment she stepped off the small charter plane in Leticia, Colombia. Even at dawn, the air was thick enough to swim through, carrying scents of earth, vegetation, and something wild she couldn't identify. Her backpack felt heavier than it had in Chicago, weighed down not just with supplies but with the enormity of what she was attempting. The pilot, a weathered man named Carlos who'd asked no questions about her destination, helped unload her gear. You sure about this, señorita? The coordinates you gave me, that's deep jungle, very remote. Maya nodded, though certainty was the last thing she felt. 3 days had passed since her grandfather's death, 3 days of feverish research that had revealed disturbing gaps in her family's history. Public records showed her great-great-grandfather had indeed been part of a geological survey in 1892, but all official documentation ended abruptly in September of that year. No final reports, no expedition summary, nothing but a single newspaper clipping about tragic losses in the Amazon interior. More troubling were the modern references she'd found. A 1987 mining permit application for the same general area had been mysteriously withdrawn. A 2003 environmental survey had been classified by the Colombian government. And just last year, a team of archaeologists had requested access to the region. Their request was denied, and 2 months later, their research funding was inexplicably revoked. Someone very powerful wanted that area to remain untouched. The town of Leticia buzzed with early morning activity as Maya made her way to the river port. Vendors were setting up stalls, and the air filled with the aroma of frying plantains and strong coffee. She'd arranged to meet a guide here, someone Carlos had recommended with the caveat that Diego Vargas was reliable but peculiar. She found him exactly where Carlos had said she would, sitting on an overturned crate near the dock, reading what appeared to be a very old book. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe early 30s, with the lean build of someone accustomed to physical labor. His dark hair was pulled back, and there was something in his eyes that suggested he'd seen more than most people his age should have. "You're the American woman looking for ghosts," he said without looking up from his book. It wasn't a question. "I'm looking for something my family lost a long time ago." Maya showed him the map, watching his expression carefully. Diego's eyes widened slightly when he saw the markings, particularly the symbol near the 10th. He traced it with his finger. The same circular design with radiating lines that had puzzled Maya for days. "Where did you get this?" His voice had changed, becoming more serious. "My grandfather left it to me." "Why? Do you recognize it?" Diego closed his book and stood, studying her face intently. "My grandmother was Ticuna. She used to tell stories about the old days, about things that came from the sky and were hidden in the deep forest. She drew symbols like this one." He paused. "She also said they were protected by something that wasn't quite human anymore." A chill ran down Maya's spine despite the oppressive heat. "Protected how?" She never said exactly, just that some secrets were too dangerous for the outside world, and that the forest itself would defend them. Diego shouldered his pack. Most people would tell you it's just indigenous folklore, but my grandmother was never wrong about the forest. They spent the next hour gathering additional supplies and loading Diego's motorized canoe. Maya had tried to pack light, but Diego insisted on extra water purification tablets, a satellite phone, and a medical kit that seemed disproportionately large for a simple treasure hunt. "You said on the phone this was about family history," Diego said as they pushed off from the dock. "But Carlos mentioned you paid for his discretion as well as his services. What aren't you telling me?" Maya watched the civilization of Leticia fall away behind them as they moved upriver. The forest pressed in on both sides, an impenetrable wall of green that seemed to swallow sound itself. She thought about the man who'd been watching her apartment, about the strange phone calls that had started the day after her grandfather's funeral. Calls where no one spoke, but she could hear breathing on the other end. "I think someone else is looking for whatever my family found," she said finally. "And I don't think they want to share." Diego nodded grimly. "Then we'd better find it first." He gunned the motor, and they accelerated into the maze of waterways that would take them deep into the Amazon basin. Behind them, unnoticed in the morning bustle of the port, a man in khaki clothing spoke quietly into a satellite phone. Within minutes, another boat pushed off from a different dock, following their wake at a careful distance. The hunt had begun. The sound of splintering wood echoed through the house as Maya shoved her grandfather's antique desk against the front door. Her hands trembled as she fumbled with the ancient map, trying to fold it properly while keeping one eye on the windows. The men in suits had disappeared into the night, but she knew they'd be back. Her phone buzzed. Another unknown number. "Don't answer it," she whispered to herself, but her finger hovered over the screen. What if it was help? What if someone knew what was happening to her? The caller hung up before she could decide. Immediately, another call came through. Same unknown number. This time, she answered. "Maya Castellanos." The voice was gravelly, older. "You have something that doesn't belong to you. I don't know what you're talking about." She tried to keep her voice steady, but it cracked on the last word. "Your grandfather was a stubborn man. Cost him his life, that stubbornness. Don't make the same mistake." The line went dead. Maya's blood ran cold. They were admitting to killing him. Her grandfather hadn't died peacefully in his sleep. He'd been murdered for whatever secret this map contained. She spread the yellowed parchment across the coffee table, studying it under the lamp's harsh light. The markings were clearer now that she wasn't crying. Strange symbols dotted a hand-drawn river system that looked like the Amazon basin. At the center, where multiple tributaries converged, someone had drawn what appeared to be a temple or structure. Beneath it, in her grandfather's shaky handwriting, La Caja del Destino, the box of destiny. Below that, coordinates in faded ink. Maya grabbed her laptop and pulled up Google Earth, inputting the numbers with shaking fingers. The satellite image revealed nothing but endless green canopy, hundreds of miles from the nearest civilization. If something was hidden there, it was buried deep in one of the most dangerous places on Earth. A soft scraping sound came from the back of the house. Maya froze, listening. The noise came again, deliberate, careful. Someone was trying to get in through the rear door. She grabbed the map and her grandfather's journal, stuffing them into her backpack along with her passport and the emergency cash he'd always insisted she keep in the kitchen drawer. For adventures, he used to say with a wink. She'd never imagined this kind of adventure. The scraping stopped. Footsteps on the back porch, trying to be silent. Maya killed the lights and crept toward the front door, slowly moving the desk aside. The hinges creaked as she opened it, and she winced at every sound. Outside, the suburban street was quiet, except for the distant hum of traffic. She slipped into the night, keeping to the shadows between streetlights. Her car was parked 3 houses down, too far. As she reached the sidewalk, she heard the unmistakable sound of breaking glass from inside her house. Running now, She reached her car and fumbled with the keys. The engine turned over on the second try, and she pulled away without headlights, not turning them on until she reached the main road. In her rearview mirror, she saw flashlight beams moving behind the windows of her house. 20 minutes later, Maya sat in a 24-hour diner, hands wrapped around a coffee cup she couldn't stop from rattling against the saucer. The journal lay open beside the map, and she forced herself to focus on her grandfather's words rather than the fear coursing through her veins. The entries spanned decades, written in a mixture of Spanish and English. Stories of expeditions, of a family legacy that stretched back to the conquistadors. Her great-great-grandfather had been part of a group that discovered something in the Amazon, something that certain people would kill to control. The box contains proof, one entry read, proof that will rewrite history. But with such knowledge comes terrible responsibility. The vanguard has hunted our family for generations, believing we will use it for power. They don't understand. We are its guardians, not its masters. The vanguard. Maya had heard that name whispered in family conversations that stopped whenever she entered the room. Her phone buzzed with a text from the unknown number. "We know where you are." Maya's head snapped up, scanning the diner. A man in a dark jacket sat at the counter, his back to her. Had he been there when she arrived? She couldn't remember. The waitress approached with a refill, and Maya made her decision. "Is there a back exit?" The woman looked confused. "Through the kitchen, honey. You okay?" Maya left $20 on the table and walked casually toward the restrooms, then slipped through the kitchen door. The staff barely looked up as she headed for the rear exit. Outside, she breathed the cool night air and tried to think clearly. She couldn't go home. She couldn't go to the police. Who would believe this story? And she couldn't run forever. That left only one option: find the box before they found her. Maya pulled out her phone and booked the next flight to Lima, Peru. The helicopter's rotors whipped the humid air into a frenzy as Elena gripped the worn leather seat, her grandfather's map pressed against her chest beneath her jacket. Through the scratched window, the Amazon sprawled endlessly below, a green tapestry that seemed to breathe and pulse with hidden life. Somewhere in that vast wilderness lay the answers she desperately needed. "You sure about these coordinates?" Marcus shouted over the engine noise, his weathered hands steady on the controls. The pilot's sun-damaged face spoke of decades flying over dangerous terrain, and Elena had paid him enough to ensure his silence about their destination. She nodded, though doubt gnawed at her stomach. The symbols on her grandfather's map had taken 3 sleepless nights to decipher, cross-referencing old Portuguese colonial records and indigenous territory markers. If she'd made even a small error in translation, they could be heading anywhere. The radio crackled suddenly, making Elena's heart skip. A voice in rapid Spanish filled the cockpit, and Marcus's expression darkened. He adjusted their heading slightly, his movements tense. "What was that?" Elena demanded. "Air traffic control in Manaus. They're asking about our flight plan." Marcus's eyes met hers in the reflection of the windscreen. "Problem is, I filed a plan for a completely different route. Someone's been tracking us." The implications hit Elena like ice water. The men who had ransacked her apartment, who had murdered Professor Valdez, they'd found her trail. She thought of the encrypted email she'd sent to her research assistant, the credit card she'd used to pay Marcus, the dozens small digital footprints that seemed impossible to avoid in the modern world. "How far to the drop point?" she asked, checking her backpack for the 10th time. Water purification tablets, emergency food, the GPS device that would hopefully guide her to whatever her grandfather had hidden. 20 minutes, maybe less. Marcus banked sharply around a towering cumulus cloud, but if they're monitoring radio traffic, they might have aircraft in the area. As if summoned by his words, a distant speck appeared on the horizon behind them. Elena squinted, trying to make out details, but the glare off the canopy made it impossible to tell if it was another helicopter or just a bird. The paranoia that had become her constant companion whispered that nothing was coincidence anymore. The jungle rushed up to meet them, as Marcus began their descent toward a small clearing beside a tributary of the Rio Negro. Elena could see the muddy water winding through the trees like a brown serpent, and the landing zone looked impossibly small from their current altitude. "Listen carefully," Marcus said, his voice grim. "I'm not sticking around once you're down. Too dangerous for both of us. You've got my satellite phone number. When you're ready for extraction, you call. But Elena," he turned to face her directly, "if you don't call within a week, I'm going to assume you're dead and forget we ever met." The bluntness of his words sent a chill through her, but she appreciated his honesty. In the past 72 hours, she'd learned that the world was far more dangerous than she'd ever imagined, and sugarcoating reality served no one. The helicopter touched down with a jarring thud, and Elena wasted no time. She grabbed her pack, checked that the waterproof case containing the map was secure, and jumped out into the oppressive heat of the rainforest. The humidity hit her like a physical force, and the cacophony of insects and bird calls was overwhelming after the mechanical noise of the aircraft. Marcus barely waited for her to clear the rotors before lifting off again, leaving her alone in a small bubble of bent grass surrounded by towering trees that seemed to lean inward like curious giants. The silence that followed the helicopter's departure was deafening, broken only by the alien sounds of the jungle. Elena consulted her grandfather's map one more time, orienting herself toward what appeared to be an ancient trail barely visible through the undergrowth. According to her calculations, she needed to travel approximately 8 kilometers northeast, following a series of landmarks that had hopefully survived the decades since the map was drawn. She took her first steps into the green cathedral, immediately feeling the weight of countless unseen eyes watching her progress. Every shadow could hide a predator, every sound might herald danger, but somewhere ahead lay the truth about her family's past, about the secret that had cost her grandfather his life and put her own in jeopardy. The thick canopy filtered the sunlight into an ethereal green glow, and Elena couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking through an alien world. Each step took her further from civilization and deeper into a realm where modern technology and ancient mysteries would soon collide. Behind her, carried on the humid air, came the distant sound of another helicopter approaching the clearing she'd just left. The morning mist clung to the riverbank like ghostly fingers as Maya crouched behind a fallen cecropia tree, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the dense foliage she could see them, 3 figures in military fatigues, methodically searching the shoreline where she and Carlos had made camp the night before. "Where is she?" The voice carried across the water, sharp with frustration. Maya recognized the accent, the same clipped English she'd heard outside her grandfather's hospital room. Carlos pressed close beside her, his machete gripped tight in weathered hands. He'd woken her before dawn, whispering urgently about boats approaching from downriver. They'd grabbed their packs and melted into the jungle just as the first grey light touched the canopy above. "The old man's map has to be here somewhere," another voice called out. She couldn't have gotten far on foot. Maya's fingers instinctively moved to the waterproof pouch strapped against her chest, where her grandfather's cryptic drawing lay hidden. The symbols seemed to burn through the plastic, as if the ancient secrets wanted to reveal themselves. She'd spent hours the previous evening studying the markings by firelight, beginning to understand that this wasn't just a treasure map, it was something far more dangerous. The third figure emerged from their abandoned shelter, holding up Carlos's fishing net. Locals helped her. "The indigenous guide we've been tracking." He spoke into a radio device. "Yes, sir, we'll find them both." Carlos touched Maya's shoulder and jerked his head deeper into the forest. Moving with practiced silence, they began to withdraw from the riverbank. Maya followed his lead, placing her feet exactly where he stepped, avoiding the brittle twigs and rustling leaves that would betray their position. They moved for what felt like hours, the jungle growing denser around them. Massive buttress roots created natural corridors between towering trees whose crowns disappeared into green shadows high above. The air hung thick with humidity and the rich scent of decomposing vegetation. Every sound made Maya's nerves spike, The crack of a falling branch, the rustle of something large moving through the understory, the distant cry of howler monkeys that echoed like prehistoric warnings. When Carlos finally stopped beside a cluster of enormous strangler figs, Maya's shirt was soaked with sweat, and her legs trembled from the constant tension of silent movement. He cupped his hand to his ear, listening intently to the forest sounds. After several minutes, he seemed satisfied they weren't being followed. "Who are these people?" Maya whispered, accepting the water bottle he offered. "Very dangerous men," Carlos replied grimly. "I recognize their leader, Valdez. He works for whoever pays the most, usually mining companies or drug cartels. But this feels different." His dark eyes studied her face. "What exactly did your grandfather leave you?" Maya hesitated. Trust didn't come easily after years of academic politics and professional betrayals, but stranded in the Amazon with armed mercenaries hunting her, Carlos was her only ally. She pulled out the waterproof pouch and carefully extracted the map. Carlos examined the parchment with growing amazement. His finger traced the strange symbols along the borders, pausing at configurations that seemed to hold special meaning. "This is very old," he murmured. "Pre-Columbian. These markings. I've seen similar ones in caves near my village, but never anything this complete. You can read it?" "Some of it. My grandmother was a shaman before the missionaries came. She taught me the old stories." He pointed to a cluster of symbols near what appeared to be a river junction. "This speaks of the heart of the forest, a sacred place where the ancestors hid something of great power." Maya felt a chill despite the jungle heat. "What kind of power?" Before Carlos could answer, the distant sound of helicopter rotors began echoing through the forest canopy. They both looked up instinctively, though the thick green ceiling above revealed nothing. "They're bringing in more men," Carlos said urgently. "We need to move deeper into the interior, away from the rivers where they can land." He rolled up the map and handed it back to her. "But first, you must understand, if this map leads where I think it does, we're walking into something that has been protected by my people for 500 years. The elders believed some secrets are too dangerous for the outside world." The helicopter sound grew louder, joined by a second aircraft. Maya secured the map against her chest and shouldered her pack. "My grandfather died protecting this secret. I won't let his sacrifice be meaningless." Carlos studied her for a long moment, then nodded grimly. "Then we go to the heart of the forest. But remember, the jungle protects its secrets jealously. Not everyone who seeks them survives to tell the tale." He turned and plunged deeper into the green maze, leaving Maya to follow and wonder what ancient forces she had awakened with her grandfather's dying gift. The sound of rushing water grew louder as Maya pushed through the dense undergrowth, Marcus close behind her. Her grandfather's map had led them deeper into the rainforest than she'd ever imagined possible, following tributaries that didn't appear on any modern chart. The ancient symbols seemed to pulse with meaning now, as if the jungle itself was awakening memories buried in her blood. "There," Marcus whispered, pointing through a gap in the canopy. "The waterfall from the map." Maya's breath caught. The cascade tumbled from a moss-covered cliff face, creating a natural amphitheater of mist and sound. But it was what lay behind the falling water that made her heart race, a dark opening in the rock, partially concealed by centuries of growth. "The entrance," she breathed. "It's real." They approached carefully, every instinct screaming danger. The silence felt wrong after days of constant jungle chatter. No birds called, no insects hummed. Even the monkeys that had followed them for miles had vanished. Marcus grabbed her arm. "Maya, look." Fresh boot prints marked the muddy bank near the waterfall's base. Deep treads, military style, at least 4 different sets, maybe more. "Valdez," Maya said, the name tasting like poison. The man who'd killed her grandfather, who'd torn through her apartment, who'd somehow tracked them despite their careful route through the jungle. How did they get here so fast? Marcus checked his rifle, though Maya knew their small cache of weapons would be useless against a well-armed team. They had the other half of the map, she realized. They knew the general area. They just needed us to lead them to the exact spot. The sound of voices carried over the water's roar, Spanish, urgent, echoing from within the cave. Maya's stomach dropped. They were too late. "We have to go in," she said. "Whatever they're looking for, it belongs to my family." Marcus stared at her. "That's suicide. They'll be armed, organized. We don't even know how many." "Then we wait for them to leave with whatever's in there. Let my grandfather's death mean nothing?" Maya's voice rose despite the danger. "No, there's another way in. There has to be." She studied the map again, tracing the faded lines with her finger. Her grandfather's journal had mentioned something about the Guardian's Path, a phrase that had puzzled her for days. Now, looking at the cliff face, she noticed something the others had missed. A narrow ledge ran along the rock wall, hidden by hanging vines and accessible only from the far side of the pool. It would be treacherous, but it might lead to another entrance. "There," she pointed. "We go around." The climb tested every muscle in Maya's body. The rock was slick with moisture, the handholds barely adequate. One slip would send them tumbling into the churning water below. Behind her, Marcus muttered a steady stream of curses in 3 languages. The ledge led to a crack in the cliff face, so narrow they had to turn sideways to squeeze through. Maya's claustrophobia kicked in as the walls pressed against her chest and back, but she forced herself forward. Her grandfather had done this. She could feel his presence, guiding her steps. The passage opened into a natural chamber lit by phosphorescent moss. Ancient stone carvings covered the walls, symbols that matched those on the map, but also others she'd never seen. Human figures intertwined with serpents and jaguars, astronomical charts that predated known civilizations by millennia. And there, in the center of the chamber, sat the chest. It was smaller than she'd expected, carved from a single piece of black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Golden inlays formed patterns that hurt to look at directly, as if they contained some fundamental truth the human eye wasn't meant to process. "My God," Marcus whispered. "What is it?" Before Maya could answer, voices echoed from a tunnel on the far side of the chamber. Valdez and his team working their way through the main passage. They had minutes, maybe less. Maya approached the chest with trembling hands. According to the journal, opening it required more than just a key. It needed blood from the Guardian's lineage. Her lineage. She pulled out her grandfather's knife, the blade still sharp after decades. "Maya, don't," Marcus warned. "We don't know what—" The cut was quick and clean across her palm. Blood dripped onto the chest's surface, and the golden inlays began to glow. The stone lid shifted with a grinding sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. Inside, nestled in faded silk, lay 3 objects: a crystal pendant that pulsed with inner light, a scroll covered in mathematical formulas that made her head spin, and a small metallic device unlike anything she'd ever seen. The voices were closer now, footsteps in the main tunnel. Maya grabbed the pendant, and the world exploded into color and sound. Images flooded her mind, civilizations rising and falling, technologies beyond imagination, a responsibility that had been passed down through generations of her family. Now she understood why people had died to keep this secret, and why others would kill to possess it. The humid air pressed against Maya's skin like a living thing as she crouched behind the massive buttress roots of a cecropia tree. Her heart hammered against her ribs while she watched 3 figures emerge from the green curtain of vegetation 50 yards away. They moved with military precision, their black tactical gear incongruous against the riot of color that was the Amazon canopy. Dr. Chen's hand found her shoulder, his fingers trembling slightly. "Volkov's men," he whispered, barely audible above the symphony of insect calls and distant howler monkeys. Maya pressed the leather map case closer to her chest. The cryptic symbols her grandfather had traced with dying fingers seemed to burn through the protective covering. She'd memorized every mark, every curve of the ancient lines, but the physical map remained their only proof of the treasure's location. The lead figure raised his hand, and the trio stopped. Maya caught a glimpse of sophisticated equipment, GPS units, satellite phones, weapons that gleamed dully in the filtered sunlight. These weren't treasure hunters stumbling through the jungle. They were professionals, and they were closing in. "We need to move," Maya breathed, but Chen shook his head minutely. "Wait, look at their formation." Maya followed his gaze and understood. The men weren't searching randomly. They were following a systematic grid pattern, sweeping back and forth with the methodical patience of hunters who knew their prey was trapped. Her stomach dropped as she realized the implications. They knew exactly where she was. The thought had barely formed when the sharp crack of a breaking branch echoed from behind them. Maya spun around to see two more figures approaching from the opposite direction, their faces hidden behind tactical masks. They'd been herded like animals into a killing zone. "Run!" Chen hissed, shoving her toward a narrow gap between two fallen logs. Maya didn't hesitate. She plunged through the opening, thorns tearing at her clothes as she scrambled over rotting wood slick with moss and decay. Behind her, she heard Chen's labored breathing and the shouts of their pursuers as the trap sprung closed. The jungle floor rose sharply ahead, transforming into a treacherous slope of loose soil and exposed roots. Maya's boots slipped on the wet earth, sending her sliding backward until her fingers found purchase on a thick vine. She hauled herself upward, muscles burning with the effort. A gunshot cracked through the forest, unnaturally loud in the green cathedral. Maya's blood turned to ice as she heard Chen cry out somewhere below her. She turned back, searching frantically through the vegetation, but saw only shadows and the relentless pursuit of black-clad figures. "Keep going!" Chen's voice carried up to her, strained but determined. "Don't stop!" Maya bit back a sob and forced herself to climb higher. The map case bounced against her hip with each desperate movement, a constant reminder of why people were dying around her. Her grandfather's secret had already cost Dr. Morrison his life, and now Chen, another gunshot. Then silence. Maya reached the crest of the ridge and paused to catch her breath, scanning the jungle ahead for any sign of refuge. The canopy stretched endlessly in all directions, a maze of green that could hide anything or anyone. The sound of pursuit had faded, but Maya knew better than to feel relief. Volkov's men were regrouping, probably calling for reinforcements. She had minutes at best before they resumed the hunt. She pulled out the map with shaking hands, trying to orient herself using the landmarks her grandfather had so carefully detailed. The ancient symbols seemed to shift and dance before her eyes, but gradually the pattern emerged. According to the markings, she was close, perhaps only a few miles from the location marked with her family's crest. A branch snapped to her left, and Maya froze. Through the undergrowth, she glimpsed movement, but not the black uniforms of Volkov's mercenaries. These figures wore earth-toned clothing that blended seamlessly with the forest, and they moved with the fluid grace of people born to this environment. Maya made a split-second decision. She stepped into the open, hands raised but still clutching the map case. "I'm not armed," she called softly. 3 indigenous men materialized from the forest as if conjured from the very trees themselves. Their faces were painted with intricate patterns, and their eyes held a mixture of curiosity and wariness. The oldest, a man whose weathered features spoke of decades in the jungle, stepped forward. "You are the granddaughter," he said in heavily accented English. "We have been waiting." Maya's mind reeled. "Waiting? How did you—" "Your grandfather came to us many years ago. He told us that one day his blood would return to claim what was hidden." The elder's gaze dropped to the map case. "The time has come." Before Maya could respond, the distant sound of helicopters began to echo through the jungle, growing steadily louder. The elder's expression hardened. "They bring death to our land. Come, we will take you to the sacred place before they destroy everything." The screech of metal against stone echoed through the cavern as Maya pried open the ancient chest with trembling fingers. Her headlamp illuminated intricate engravings covering every surface of the container, symbols that seemed to writhe in the dancing light. Marcus stood behind her, his breathing heavy with anticipation, while Elena kept watch at the cavern entrance. Inside, wrapped in oiled leather that had somehow survived centuries of humidity, lay a collection of artifacts that made Maya's heart race. The first item she lifted was a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with her ancestors' careful handwriting in multiple languages. Beneath it, a series of detailed maps showed not just the Amazon basin, but locations across 3 continents. At the bottom of the chest, her fingers closed around something cold and metallic. "What is it?" Marcus whispered, moving closer. Maya pulled out an ornate compass, but unlike any she'd ever seen. Instead of pointing north, its needle spun wildly before settling on a direction that seemed to pull at something deep in her chest. The compass face bore the same symbol from her grandfather's map, the intertwined serpents. "There's more," she breathed, extracting what appeared to be a crystalline artifact, roughly the size of her palm. It pulsed with an inner light that had nothing to do with her headlamp. The moment her skin touched its surface, images flooded her mind. Vast underground networks, ancient civilizations, and something that made her blood run cold, modern men in suits standing around boardroom tables, discussing the very artifacts she now held. "Maya!" Elena's urgent whisper cut through her visions. "We have company." The sound of approaching helicopters grew louder, their rotors creating a thunderous echo in the cavern. Maya quickly stuffed the artifacts into her backpack, her mind reeling from what she'd just experienced. The journal alone would take days to decipher, but the compass seemed to be pointing deeper into the cave system. "This way," she said, following the compass's pull toward a narrow passage they hadn't noticed before. The opening was barely wide enough for a person, but the alternative was facing whoever was rappelling down from those helicopters. They squeezed through the gap, just as voices echoed from the main cavern. Maya recognized the clipped accent of the man who'd been hunting them, Cortez. His angry shout suggested he'd discovered the empty chest. The passage led to a natural tunnel system that seemed to stretch endlessly into the mountain. Maya's compass continued to guide them, its glow providing additional light in the oppressive darkness. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew fainter, but never disappeared entirely. "What did you see back there?" Marcus asked as they paused to catch their breath in a wider section of tunnel. "When you touched that crystal thing, you looked like you'd seen a ghost." Maya hesitated, unsure how to explain the visions without sounding insane. "I saw memories, I think. This isn't just about some lost treasure. My ancestor discovered something that connects to the modern world. There are people, powerful people, who know about this." Elena checked her weapon, her expression grim. That would explain the unlimited resources they seem to have. But what kind of secret is worth this much trouble? Before Maya could answer, the compass in her hand began pulsing more rapidly. The tunnel ahead split into 3 directions, but the needle pointed steadily toward the leftmost path. As they approached the junction, Maya noticed fresh air flowing from that direction, a sign they might be nearing another exit. The tunnel began to slope upward, and after what felt like hours of climbing, they emerged onto a ledge overlooking a hidden valley. Below them stretched an impossible sight, the ruins of a vast city, its stone structures overgrown with vegetation but still clearly visible. At the center stood a pyramid that dwarfed anything Maya had seen in textbooks. "This can't be real," Marcus breathed. Maya consulted the journal, her grandfather's translation notes helping her decipher key passages. According to the text, this was the center of a network that spanned continents, a civilization that had mastered technologies lost to time. But more disturbing were the recent entries, written in her grandfather's hand during his final expedition. He discovered that certain families, certain corporations, had been guarding pieces of this knowledge for generations, using it to accumulate power and wealth. The crystal in her backpack pulsed warmly, and Maya realized it was some kind of key, not just to unlock doors, but to unlock knowledge that could reshape their understanding of human history. No wonder powerful forces wanted it buried. "We need to get down there," she said, pointing to the pyramid. "Whatever my ancestor hid, whatever my grandfather died protecting, it's in that structure." But even as she spoke, the sound of helicopter rotors echoed across the valley. Their pursuers had found another way in, and time was running out. The carved symbols on the ancient stone seemed to pulse in the flickering torchlight as Maya traced her finger along their edges. Each mark felt warm beneath her touch, as if the rock itself held some dormant energy waiting to be awakened. Behind her, Carlos kept watch while she worked to decipher the cryptic message that had cost so many lives to protect. "The spacing here is deliberate," she murmured, comparing the symbols to her grandfather's map. "It's not just a language, it's a sequence." A branch snapped somewhere in the darkness beyond their small circle of light. Carlos raised his machete, muscles tensed. The jungle had grown eerily quiet since they'd discovered the stone marker, as if even the insects sensed they were trespassing on sacred ground. Maya's heart hammered as she recognized the pattern emerging from the symbols. 3 interlocking spirals, identical to the ones tattooed on her grandfather's arm, the same mark she'd glimpsed on the documents in his hidden study. The realization hit her like a physical blow. "Carlos, look at this." Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "My grandfather wasn't just protecting a family secret. He was part of something much larger." Before Carlos could respond, the distant sound of helicopter rotors echoed through the canopy. Maya's blood turned to ice. Somehow, despite all their precautions, despite traveling through terrain that should have been impassable, their pursuers had found them. "How is that possible?" Carlos grabbed their packs. "We've been covering our tracks." Maya's mind raced as she photographed the remaining symbols with her grandfather's old camera. The helicopter grew louder, and she could hear voices calling through the trees, not in Spanish or Portuguese, but in clipped English accents that confirmed her worst fears about who was hunting them. "There," she said, pointing to a narrow gap between 2 massive cecropia trees. "The map shows a passage that way." They plunged into the undergrowth just as the first beam of a searchlight swept across the stone marker. Maya clutched her grandfather's compass, praying his notations were accurate. The passage was barely wide enough for them to squeeze through single file, thorny vines catching at their clothes and exposed skin. The helicopter circled overhead, its rotor wash stirring the canopy into violent motion. Leaves and small branches rained down as Maya and Carlos pushed deeper into what felt like a living tunnel. The walls seemed to close in around them, formed by trees so ancient and intertwined that their massive trunks had grown together over centuries. "Maya!" Carlos's voice carried a strange note of awe. "Look up." She tilted her head back and gasped. High above them, carved into the living wood of the trees themselves, more symbols spiraled upward toward a canopy so thick it blocked out all moonlight. But the symbols glowed with a faint phosphorescence, creating a constellation of meaning in the darkness. "It's a map," she breathed. "The trees themselves are the map." As they moved forward following the glowing symbols, Maya began to understand the true scope of what her grandfather had protected. This wasn't just about hidden treasure or family history. The symbols told a story of civilization far older than anything in the history books, of knowledge that predated the conquest by centuries. The helicopter sounds faded behind them, but Maya knew their reprieve was temporary. Whoever was hunting them had resources and determination that suggested government backing, possibly from multiple countries. The stakes were higher than she'd imagined. The tunnel of trees suddenly opened into a circular clearing dominated by a structure that defied belief. Rising from the jungle floor like a dream-made manifest, a pyramid of black stone stood covered in the same glowing symbols. But this wasn't the crude stonework she'd expected. The surfaces were polished to mirror smoothness, fitted together with precision that would challenge modern engineering. "Impossible," Carlos whispered. "There's no record of anything like this." Maya approached the pyramid's base, where her grandfather's map indicated the final marker should be hidden. Her hands shook as she found the concealed panel, exactly where the map promised. Inside, wrapped in oiled leather that had somehow survived decades in the humid jungle, lay a key unlike anything she'd ever seen. The metal was black as midnight, but warm to the touch, covered in intricate engravings that seemed to shift and move in the phosphorescent light. As her fingers closed around it, images flashed through her mind. Her grandfather as a young man, standing in this very clearing with two other people she didn't recognize. All three wore expressions of solemn determination. Then she saw it, partially hidden behind a curtain of hanging moss near the pyramid's entrance. A chest, just as her grandfather had promised, its surface gleaming with the same impossible black metal as the key. But as Maya stepped toward it, a new sound reached their ears, the soft whisper of footsteps on jungle floor. Someone else had found the clearing. The sound of rushing water grew louder as they pushed through a curtain of hanging vines, and Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. The ancient map had led them here, to what appeared to be a natural amphitheater carved into the jungle floor. Mist rose from a waterfall that cascaded down moss-covered rocks, creating an ethereal veil that seemed to shimmer with secrets. "This is it," she whispered, pulling the weathered parchment from her pack. The final marking on her grandfather's map matched the distinctive rock formations before them, 3 towering stones that jutted from the earth like ancient sentinels. Carlos moved beside her, his machete still drawn, eyes scanning the perimeter. "Too quiet," he murmured. "Birds should be singing here." Maya felt it too, an unnatural stillness that made her skin crawl. Even the insects had fallen silent, as if the jungle itself was holding its breath. She traced her finger along the map's final symbols, trying to decipher their meaning. The chest was close. She could feel it in her bones. A branch snapped behind them. They spun around to find Dr. Helena Voss emerging from the green shadows, flanked by 2 mercenaries with assault rifles. Her expedition clothes were pristine despite days in the jungle, and her smile was as cold as winter steel. "Miss Chen," she said, her cultured voice echoing off the stone walls, "you've saved us considerable time and effort, though I must admit, watching you stumble through the jungle has been rather entertaining." Maya's grip tightened on the map. "You've been following us." "Following? My dear girl, we've been ahead of you since yesterday. Modern technology versus your grandfather's ancient scribblings, hardly a fair race." Helena stepped closer, her grey eyes fixed on the parchment. "But credit where it's due. You've proven surprisingly resourceful for an amateur." Carlos raised his machete, but the mercenaries immediately trained their weapons on him. Helena clicked her tongue disapprovingly. Now. Let's keep this civilized. You've done the hard work of translation and navigation. All I require is the map and whatever lies hidden in that chest your grandfather was so desperate to protect." "Why?" Maya demanded, taking a step backward toward the waterfall. "What's so important that you'd kill for it?" Helena's laugh was like breaking glass. "Kill? Oh, Maya, your grandfather didn't just stumble upon some dusty artifact. He uncovered proof of something that could topple governments, destroy economies, rewrite the very foundation of modern civilization. Do you have any idea what your family has been sitting on?" The mist swirled around them, and Maya caught a glimpse of something behind the waterfall, a dark opening in the rock face. Her pulse quickened. "The consortium has spent decades tracking down every trace of this secret," Helena continued. "Your grandfather was the last loose end. Well, until you inherited his burden. He died protecting this," Maya said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Which means it's not meant for people like you." "People like me?" Helena's expression hardened. "I represent order, stability. Whatever's in that chest could destabilize everything we've built. Sometimes the truth is too dangerous for the world to handle." Carlos caught Maya's eye and nodded almost imperceptibly toward the waterfall. She understood. They had one chance. "My grandfather believed in the truth," Maya said, slowly backing toward the rushing water. "He believed people had the right to know their history, no matter how uncomfortable. Your grandfather was a fool who—" Maya dove sideways as Carlos hurled his machete at the nearest mercenary. The blade caught the man in the shoulder, spinning him around, and his rifle sprayed bullets harmlessly into the canopy. Maya rolled behind the central stone pillar, As the second gunman opened fire, chips of ancient rock exploding around her. "Don't kill her!" Helena screamed above the gunfire. "We need the map!" Maya scrambled toward the waterfall on hands and knees, the roar of water mixing with shouts and the crack of branches as Carlos disappeared into the jungle, drawing the mercenaries after him. She prayed he would escape. He'd already risked too much for her grandfather's legacy. The icy water hit her like a physical blow as she plunged through the cascade. Behind the falls, just as she'd glimpsed, a narrow cave entrance beckoned. She squeezed through the opening, her soaked clothes scraping against rough stone. Inside, the sound of pursuit faded to a distant echo. Emergency flares from her pack cast dancing shadows on the cave walls, revealing carved symbols that matched those on her grandfather's map. Her breath misted in the sudden cold as she followed the passage deeper into the mountain's heart. The tunnel opened into a circular chamber, and Maya's light fell upon something that made her gasp. There, on a raised stone platform in the center of the room, sat an ornate chest covered in the same mysterious symbols. But it wasn't the chest that stole her breath, it was what surrounded it. The walls were covered in paintings, murals that depicted scenes impossible to believe, showing a history that couldn't exist. Her grandfather's secret was bigger than she'd ever imagined. The screech of metal against stone echoed through the cavern as Maya forced the ancient chest open. Her headlamp illuminated the interior, revealing not gold or jewels, but something far more valuable and dangerous. Dozens of leather-bound journals lay stacked inside, their pages yellow with age, alongside rolled maps drawn on what looked like human skin. "My God," Dr. Reeves whispered, leaning over her shoulder. "These are original expedition logs. Look at the dates, some go back to the 1500s. Maya lifted the topmost journal with trembling hands. The leather cover bore the Cortez family crest, the same symbol from her grandfather's map. She opened it carefully, squinting at the faded Spanish text written in an elegant hand. "It's a record," she said, her voice barely audible. "A record of what they found here." The pages detailed expeditions into the deepest parts of the Amazon, describing encounters with indigenous tribes who possessed knowledge that defied European understanding. Advanced medicines that could cure diseases thought incurable, agricultural techniques that could feed entire civilizations. And most shocking of all, mathematical and astronomical calculations that wouldn't be discovered by European science for centuries. They weren't conquerors, Maya realized, her heart racing. The Cortez family weren't here to steal gold. They were documenting indigenous knowledge, trying to preserve it. She flipped through more pages, finding detailed botanical drawings of plants with their medicinal properties carefully noted. Maps showing sustainable farming methods, star charts that perfectly predicted celestial movements. It was a treasure trove of indigenous wisdom that colonial powers had tried to erase. "This is why people have been killed," Dr. Reeves said grimly. "This knowledge threatens entire industries, pharmaceutical companies, agricultural corporations. Imagine what would happen if this information became public." A distant rumble made them both freeze. Voices echoed from the cavern entrance, growing closer. "They found us," Maya hissed, quickly stuffing journals into her backpack. "How much can we carry?" "Not enough," Dr. Reeves replied, grabbing handfuls of rolled maps. "There's centuries of knowledge here." The voices grew louder, Marcus Blackwood's cultured tone mixing with the harsh commands of armed men. Maya's pulse hammered as she realized they had minutes, maybe less. "Wait," she said, noticing something carved into the bottom of the chest. More symbols, but these were different, newer. Her grandfather's handwriting. "There's another message." She traced the carved letters with her finger, translating the Spanish in her head. "The seeds are planted where the river speaks to the sky." "What does that mean?" Dr. Reeves asked, shouldering his pack heavy with stolen journals. Before Maya could answer, the sound of boots on stone grew unmistakable. They were out of time. "This way," she whispered, pointing to a narrow passage at the back of the chamber. "My grandfather wouldn't have led us to a dead end." They squeezed through the opening just as flashlight beams began dancing across the cavern walls behind them. The passage was barely wide enough for one person, forcing them to move single file through the suffocating darkness. "Where are they?" Blackwood's voice boomed behind them, furious. "Search every inch of this place." Maya's headlamp revealed that the passage angled upward, carved from solid rock by centuries of water flow. Ancient handholds had been carved into the walls, suggesting this route had been used by many before them. "It's a chimney," Dr. Reeves panted behind her. "A natural formation leading up through the cliff face." They climbed in desperate silence, their packs weighing them down with stolen knowledge. Maya's arms burned from the effort, but she forced herself upward, driven by the sounds of pursuit below. After what felt like hours, but was probably minutes, fresh air hit her face. The passage opened onto a narrow ledge halfway up the cliff face, hidden from view by hanging vines. Below them, the Amazon stretched endlessly, while above, the night sky blazed with stars. "The river speaks to the sky," Maya whispered, understanding flooding through her. She pulled out her grandfather's map, comparing it to the view before them. "Look, from this height, you can see where the river bends create the same pattern as the constellation Crux." Dr. Reeves followed her gaze. "The Southern Cross. Your grandfather used celestial navigation to mark another location." Maya traced the alignment with her finger. If the constellation pointed the way, following the river's curve would lead them to— "There's another cache," she said with certainty. "Somewhere downstream where the river mimics the star pattern." Behind them, angry voices echoed from the cavern as their pursuers discovered the passage. They had perhaps an hour before Blackwood's men figured out the route and followed. "We need to reach the river," Maya said, studying the cliff face. "There has to be a way down." As if in answer to her words, her headlamp caught a glint of metal embedded in the rock face. Another anchor point, with rotted rope still attached. Her grandfather had planned this escape route decades ago, knowing that someday someone would need to flee with the truth. The chest sat before Maya like a sleeping beast, its obsidian surface drinking in the pale morning light that filtered through the canopy. Her fingers traced the intricate symbols carved into its lid, the same ones from her grandfather's map, but somehow more alive here, as if they pulsed with an energy she couldn't quite perceive. "It's warm," she whispered, pulling her hand back in surprise. Chen crouched beside her, his expression troubled. "Maya, before you open this, we need to talk about what your grandfather told me. The real reason he sent you here." She looked up from the chest, noting the gravity in his voice. "What do you mean?" "The night before he died, he called me. He said the chest doesn't just contain a secret, it contains a choice. One that could save your family or damn it forever." The jungle around them seemed to hold its breath. Even the constant chatter of birds and insects had fallen silent, as if the forest itself was waiting. "He spoke of a legacy that spans 5 centuries, Chen continued. "Your ancestor didn't just hide gold or artifacts in this chest. He hid knowledge. Maps to something the Spanish conquistadors would have killed entire civilizations to possess." Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. What kind of knowledge? The location of 7 other sites like this one, places where indigenous peoples hid their most sacred treasures before the conquistadors could destroy them. Collectively, they represent the lost history of an entire continent. She stared at the chest, understanding dawning. "That's why Reeves and his people have been hunting our family. For generations. Your grandfather's branch of the family has been the Guardians, but now—" Chen's voice trailed off. "Now I'm the last one." Maya's hands trembled as she reached for the chest again. "But why would opening it damn our family?" "Because once the knowledge is revealed, there's no putting it back. Governments, corporations, treasure hunters, they'll never stop coming. Your family will never be safe again." A distant sound made them both freeze. The rhythmic thrum of helicopter rotors, still far off but growing closer. "They found us," Maya breathed. Chen was already on his feet, scanning the sky through the canopy. "We have maybe 10 minutes before they can land and reach us on foot." Maya looked between the approaching aircraft and the chest. 500 years of hidden history lay beneath her fingertips, the accumulated wisdom and treasures of civilizations that had been systematically erased from the world. Her grandfather had died protecting this secret, and now the choice was hers. "If I leave it unopened, does the killing stop?" she asked. "Maybe, but the knowledge dies with you forever." The helicopter was closer now, its sound drowning out her thoughts. She closed her eyes, thinking of her grandfather's weathered hands as he'd pressed the map into hers. His final words echoed in her memory. "Some secrets are worth dying for, Mija, but you'll know which ones are worth living for." Her hands found the chest's ornate latch. It was made of the same dark metal as the chest itself, fashioned in the shape of a serpent eating its own tail. As her fingers touched it, the metal grew warm, and she felt a subtle click. The lid opened with a whisper. Inside, nestled in faded silk that had somehow survived the centuries, lay not gold or jewels, but something far more precious. A collection of bark cloth codices, their surfaces covered in intricate glyphs and maps. Beneath them, 7 small obsidian mirrors, each no larger than her palm, arranged in a perfect circle around a leather journal. Maya lifted the journal with reverent hands. Her grandfather's handwriting filled the first page. "For Maya, the future guardian. The 7 mirrors will show you the path, but only when held beneath the light of the full moon. Choose wisely who you trust with this burden." "Maya!" Chen's urgent voice snapped her attention back to their immediate danger. The helicopter was directly overhead now, its downdraft shaking the trees around them. She made her decision in an instant. Grabbing the journal and the 7 mirrors, she stuffed them into her backpack while leaving the codices in the chest. The ancient documents were too fragile to survive a jungle chase, but her grandfather's notes and the obsidian guides were small enough to carry. "This way," Chen said, leading her away from the clearing, just as the first rappelling lines dropped from the helicopter above. As they plunged into the green maze of the rainforest, Maya felt the weight of the mirrors against her back. She had made her choice, not to hide the secret forever, but to become its guardian. The knowledge would survive, but on her terms. Behind them, shouts erupted as Reeves and his team discovered the open chest. They had the ancient codices now, but without the mirrors and her grandfather's journal, the documents were just beautiful artifacts. The real treasure was running through the Amazon with her. The ancient stone chamber felt alive with malevolent energy as Maya pressed her palm against the crystalline surface of the chest. The moment her skin made contact, searing pain shot up her arm like liquid fire, and visions flooded her mind with violent intensity. She saw her grandfather as a young man, standing in this very chamber alongside 2 other figures, a woman with kind eyes and a stern-faced man she didn't recognize. They were arguing, their voices echoing off the walls as they gestured frantically at the chest. The woman was crying, pleading with the others to destroy whatever lay inside, while the man insisted they had a responsibility to preserve it. "The knowledge was never meant for our world," the woman said, her voice carrying across decades to reach Maya's consciousness. "Some secrets should remain buried," but her grandfather shook his head. "Future generations deserve the choice we're too afraid to make." The vision shifted, and Maya watched in horror as shadowy figures burst into the chamber. Gunfire erupted, and the woman collapsed, crimson spreading across her white shirt. The stern man grabbed something from the chest, a small glowing artifact, and thrust it into her grandfather's hands before falling to his own knees. "Protect it," he gasped. "Don't let them have it all." Maya jerked her hand away from the chest, gasping as the present crashed back around her. Her palm was burned in the exact pattern of the crystalline surface, but she barely noticed the pain. Understanding flooded through her like ice water. The map wasn't just directions to treasure, it was a key, and she was the lock. Behind her, footsteps echoed in the tunnel. Dr. Hassan's voice carried through the darkness closer than before. "Maya, there's nowhere left to run. You've done well to make it this far, but this ends now." She looked at the chest again, noticing details she'd missed before. Intricate symbols covered its surface, and as she studied them, they seemed to shift and change before her eyes. The burns on her palm throbbed, and she realized they weren't just injuries. They were a pattern, a genetic key passed down through her bloodline. The artifact her grandfather had protected all these years wasn't just hidden in their family's possessions. It was hidden in their very DNA. Maya placed both hands on the chest despite the searing pain. This time, she was ready for the visions, letting them wash over her as the lock mechanism began to respond. The symbols glowed brighter, and she felt something fundamental shift in the chamber around her. Ancient gears groaned to life within the walls. The floor beneath her feet trembled, and she realized the entire structure was some kind of massive machine, dormant for centuries, but still functional. The chest wasn't just a container, it was a control mechanism. Light erupted from the crystalline surface, and Maya found herself connected to something vast and incomprehensible. Images flashed through her mind, star charts showing constellations that didn't exist in Earth's sky, mathematical formulas that hurt to contemplate, and technology so advanced it appeared magical. She understood now why people had killed for this secret, and why others had died to keep it hidden. The chest contained proof that humanity wasn't alone, and never had been. But more than that, it contained the tools to contact civilizations among the stars. Civilizations that might not welcome the attention of a violent, primitive species like humans. Step away from the chest, Maya. She spun around to find Dr. Hassan standing in the chamber's entrance, flanked by armed mercenaries. His scholarly demeanor had vanished, replaced by cold determination. In his hand, he held a device she recognized from her visions, the artifact her grandfather had protected. "You have the other piece," she said, understanding flooding through her. "The final component, yes. Your grandfather was clever, splitting the key between bloodline and technology. But I've spent 30 years tracking down both halves." He stepped closer, the artifact pulsing with the same rhythm as the chest. "The knowledge contained here belongs to all humanity, not hidden away by the fears of a few. The woman in my vision said it would destroy us. Dr. Catherine Wells was a coward. She couldn't see beyond the immediate dangers to the incredible possibilities." Hassan's eyes gleamed with fanatic fervor. "Contact with advanced civilizations, technology beyond our wildest dreams, answers to questions we've barely learned to ask." Maya kept her hands pressed against the chest, feeling its power building beneath her palms. The chamber continued to change around them, walls sliding apart to reveal banks of impossible machinery that hummed with alien energy. "What if she was right?" Maya asked. "What if we're not ready? Then we'll learn to be ready. Evolution doesn't wait for permission." The artifact in Hassan's hand pulsed brighter, and Maya felt the chest responding, drawing the two halves of the ancient key together across the space between them. Soon, she would have to choose, release the knowledge and risk everything, or find a way to destroy it forever. The chamber filled with blinding light as the connection began to form. The ancient chamber stretched before Maya like a cathedral carved from living stone, its walls pulsing with an otherworldly luminescence that seemed to breathe with the very heartbeat of the earth. Crystalline formations jutted from every surface, their faceted edges catching and refracting the ethereal light into dancing rainbows that painted the cavern in impossible colors. At the chamber's heart sat the chest. Maya's breath caught as she approached it, her grandfather's map clutched in trembling fingers. The chest was nothing like she had imagined, not wood or metal, but what appeared to be a single piece of polished obsidian, perfectly seamless and reflecting the cavern's light like a black mirror. Symbols were etched deep into its surface, glowing with the same soft radiance as the walls, forming patterns that hurt to look at directly, yet somehow felt familiar, as if written in the language of dreams. "My God!" Dr. Chen whispered behind her, his voice echoing in the vast space. "This predates anything we've found in South America. The craftsmanship, the materials, this shouldn't exist." Maya knelt before the chest, her hands hovering inches above its surface. The air around it hummed with energy, making her skin tingle. She could feel something calling to her from within, a presence both ancient and patient, as if it had been waiting specifically for her arrival. The sound of footsteps on stone made her turn. Marcus emerged from the tunnel behind them, his clothes torn and face streaked with dirt, but his eyes burning with an intensity that made Maya's blood run cold. In his hand, he held a pistol. "Step away from it, Maya." His voice was calm, almost gentle, but there was steel beneath the words. "You don't understand what you're dealing with." "I understand enough," Maya said, not moving from her position. "I know my grandfather died protecting this secret. I know people have been murdered to keep it buried." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Your grandfather was a fool. He thought he could control something that was never meant for human hands." He gestured at the chest with his weapon. "Do you know what's in there? Do you have any idea what you're about to unleash?" Dr. Chen stepped protectively closer to Maya. "Whatever it is, it belongs in a museum, not in the hands of whatever organization you represent." "Organization?" Marcus shook his head. "You think this is about politics? About governments and corporate interests?" His eyes never left the chest. "This is about survival, the survival of our species." Maya felt the map in her hands grow warm, its ancient parchment beginning to glow with the same light as the chamber walls. The symbols on her grandfather's drawing shifted and moved, rearranging themselves into new patterns that seemed to unlock something deep in her memory, knowledge that felt inherited rather than learned. "My grandfather knew," she said suddenly, understanding flooding through her. "He knew what you were afraid of. That's why he hid the map, why he chose me." The temperature in the chamber began to drop, and Maya could see her breath misting in the air. The crystalline formations around them pulsed faster, their light growing more intense. Whatever was happening, the chest was responding to their presence. Marcus raised his weapon. "Last chance, Maya. Walk away. Let this stay buried where it belongs." But Maya was already turning back to the chest, her hands moving with a certainty that surprised her. The symbols on its surface seemed to guide her fingers, showing her where to touch, how to press. She felt the obsidian warm beneath her palms, responding to some genetic key that had been passed down through generations of her family. "Stop!" Marcus's shout echoed through the chamber, but Maya was beyond hearing him now. The chest clicked open with a sound like breaking crystal. Light exploded from within, not the soft glow of the cavern walls, but something fierce and primal, older than civilization, older than humanity itself. Maya felt it wash over her, through her, carrying with it visions of vast knowledge and terrible responsibility. She saw civilizations rising and falling, stars being born and dying, the delicate balance that held reality together, and she understood why her grandfather had hidden it. Inside the chest lay not gold or jewels, but something far more precious and dangerous, a collection of crystalline fragments that seemed to contain entire universes within their depths, swirling with energies that made the air itself ripple and bend. "The architect's legacy," Dr. Chen breathed, his voice filled with awe and terror. "The theoretical power source that could reshape matter itself." Maya reached toward the fragments, feeling their pull, their promise of unlimited knowledge and capability. But her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory, his final words about the weight of family secrets and the price of power. Behind her, Marcus's finger tightened on the trigger, his face a mask of desperate determination. The choice that would determine the fate of everything hung suspended in the crystalline air, waiting for her decision. The ancient lock clicked open with a sound that seemed to echo through centuries. Maya's hands trembled as she lifted the heavy lid of the chest, her heart hammering against her ribs. The musty scent of old parchment and something else, something metallic and sharp, wafted up from within. Inside, nestled in faded velvet that had once been deep purple, lay 3 items that would reshape everything she thought she knew about her family's legacy. The first was a leather-bound journal, its cover worn smooth by countless hands. Maya lifted it carefully, noting the familiar handwriting on the first page, her grandfather's but younger, more confident than the shaky script of his final years. The date made her breath catch, 47 years ago, when he was barely older than she was now. "Day 1, in the Amazon," she read aloud, her voice barely a whisper. "The consortium believes we're here for oil surveys, but Miguel and I know the truth. The indigenous elders weren't lying. There is something here, something that could revolutionize our understanding of—" A sharp crack from somewhere in the temple made her freeze. Dr. Chen was on his feet instantly, machete drawn, his eyes scanning the shadows that seemed to press closer around their small circle of light. "Keep reading," he urged. "We may not have much time." Maya flipped through the pages frantically, her grandfather's words painting a picture that chilled her to the bone. The consortium, the same shadowy organization that had been hunting her, had been manipulating archaeological discoveries for decades, suppressing anything that challenged established historical narratives or threatened their control over global resources. But this discovery was different. This was bigger. "They found it," she breathed, looking at Dr. Chen with wide eyes. "Grandfather and his partner Miguel, they found proof that pre-Columbian civilizations had technology we still don't understand. Advanced metallurgy, astronomical calculations, engineering principles that wouldn't be discovered by Europeans for centuries." The second item in the chest confirmed her words. It was a metal disc, no larger than her palm, covered in intricate symbols that seemed to shift and dance in the torchlight. The metal itself was unlike anything she'd ever seen, lighter than it should be, with a faint luminescence that made her skin tingle when she touched it. "This isn't just gold," Dr. Chen said, examining the disc with reverence. "The composition is impossible. The indigenous peoples somehow created an alloy that our modern science is only beginning to understand." But it was the third item that made Maya's blood run cold. A photograph, grainy and water-stained, showing her grandfather and a younger man she didn't recognize standing beside what appeared to be an entire chamber filled with similar artifacts. In the background, partially obscured by shadows, were other figures, men in modern clothing, their faces hard and calculating. On the back of the photograph, in her grandfather's handwriting, "Miguel, I'm sorry. They made me choose. The family bloodline or the truth. I chose you, but they'll never stop hunting. Hide this. Trust no one from the consortium. M." The sound of footsteps echoed through the temple corridors, growing closer. Dr. Chen grabbed Maya's arm, his face grim. "We need to move, now." Maya clutched the journal and the metal disc to her chest, her mind reeling. Her grandfather hadn't been a simple archaeologist at all. He'd been part of something much larger, much more dangerous. And Miguel, whoever he was, had paid the ultimate price for it. "There's more," she said, scanning the final pages of the journal as they gathered their supplies. Grandfather hid other caches, other pieces of evidence. "This isn't the only site. The map," Dr. Chen said urgently. "Check the map." Maya pulled out the cryptic parchment that had started this entire journey. With the metal disc held near it, the previously incomprehensible symbols began to make sense. They weren't just directions to this temple, they were a network, a series of connected sites stretching across the Amazon basin. "It's a constellation," she whispered in amazement. "The sites mirror star patterns. Ancient peoples weren't just advanced, they were part of a coordinated civilization that spanned thousands of miles." The footsteps were getting closer now, accompanied by voices speaking in clipped professional tones. The consortium had found them. Dr. Chen doused their torch, plunging them into darkness. "There has to be another way out," he whispered. "These temples always had escape routes." Maya ran her hands along the wall behind the chest, feeling for hidden mechanisms. Her fingers found a series of small indentations that matched the symbols on the metal disc. She pressed the disc against them, and with a grinding sound that seemed loud as thunder in the confined space, a section of the wall swung inward. Cool air rushed out from the hidden passage, carrying with it the scent of earth and freedom. But as they prepared to escape, Maya realized with crystalline clarity that this was only the beginning. The chest had given her answers, but those answers had spawned 1,000 new questions. And somewhere in the darkness behind them, the people who had killed to keep these secrets buried were closing in. The ancient chamber trembled as Maya's fingers closed around the obsidian key, its surface warm despite the cool underground air. The walls seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, and the carved serpents appeared to writhe in the flickering torchlight. Behind her, she could hear the distant echoes of pursuit. Carlos and his mercenaries had found the entrance to the temple. "There's no going back now," she whispered to herself, clutching her grandfather's map against her chest. The final marking on the yellowed parchment had led her here, to this hidden sanctuary beneath the Amazon floor, where conquistadors had once sealed away something so dangerous that men had died protecting its secret for 5 centuries. The key fit perfectly into the obsidian chest that sat upon a stone altar in the chamber's center. As Maya turned it, the mechanism clicked with surprising smoothness, as if it had been waiting patiently for this moment. The lid opened with a soft hiss, releasing air that tasted of copper and time. Inside, nestled in faded crimson silk, lay 3 items that made Maya's breath catch in her throat. The first was a leather-bound journal, its pages thick with age, but remarkably preserved. The second was a small golden figurine depicting a feathered serpent, its emerald eyes gleaming with an inner light that seemed impossible. The third was a vial of liquid that swirled with an opalescent sheen, neither fully silver nor gold. Maya lifted the journal with trembling hands. The cover bore the same serpent symbol that had guided her through the treacherous Amazon, but as she opened it, the pages revealed text in Spanish. Francisco Vasquez de Coronado's own hand. Her heart hammered as she read the first entry, dated 1541. "God forgive me, but I have seen the fountain that grants not just youth, but power over life itself. The natives call it the tears of Quetzalcoatl. One drop can heal any wound, restore any organ, reverse any disease. But I have witnessed also its terrible curse. Those who drink freely become something other than human, their hunger for life consuming all around them. We came seeking gold, and found instead the power of gods, a power no mortal should wield." The sound of boots on stone grew closer. Maya quickly read on, her eyes scanning the frantic entries that detailed Coronado's horror at what his men had become after drinking from the fountain. The immortality came at a price, an insatiable need to drain life from others to sustain their own. They had become vampiric creatures, neither alive nor dead, and Coronado had been forced to destroy his own men to prevent them from returning to the world above. "The fountain's source lies beneath the temple," she read aloud, her voice barely audible. "I have taken but 3 vials of the pure tears, untainted by human consumption. These alone might heal without curse, but even this I dare not test. Better to seal this knowledge away than risk unleashing such horror upon the world." Gunfire erupted somewhere in the tunnel system above. Maya's time was running out. She tucked the journal into her pack and carefully lifted the golden figurine. The moment her skin touched the artifact, visions flooded her mind, ancient priests performing rituals beside an underground lake that glowed with supernatural light, Spanish conquistadors fighting creatures that had once been their comrades, and her own grandfather as a young man, standing in this very chamber decades ago. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Her grandfather had been here before. He had known about the curse, about the danger, and yet he had left her the map. Why? What had he expected her to do? "Maya Restrepo." Carlos's voice echoed through the chamber as he appeared in the doorway, his face twisted with greed and desperation. 3 armed men flanked him, their weapons trained on her. "Step away from the chest. You have no idea what you're dealing with." "I know exactly what this is," Maya replied, her voice steadier than she felt. She held up the vial of tears, its contents swirling hypnotically. "My grandfather trusted me to make the right choice." Carlos laughed, a harsh sound that reverberated off the stone walls. "Your grandfather was a fool who spent his life protecting a secret that could make us gods. That substance could cure every disease, end human suffering forever, or create monsters that would destroy everything we hold dear," Maya countered. "Coronado learned that lesson 500 years ago." "Coronado was weak," Carlos snarled, stepping closer. Give me the vial, and I'll let you walk away from this alive." Maya looked down at the precious liquid in her hands, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down upon her shoulders. Her grandfather's final words echoed in her memory. "Some secrets are worth dying for." She finally understood what he had meant, and why he had chosen her to carry this burden. The choice that would determine the fate of humanity lay literally in her grasp. The chest sat before Maya like a sleeping beast, its obsidian surface drinking in the filtered sunlight that managed to pierce the rainforest canopy. Her grandfather's blood, dried now to rust-colored flakes, still clung to the ancient lock mechanism. Dr. Vance lay motionless 20 feet away, his body twisted at an unnatural angle after his fall from the temple steps. Maya's hands trembled as she traced the symbols etched into the chest's surface. The same markings from her grandfather's map, the ones that had led her through hell and back to reach this moment. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a graduate student worried about thesis deadlines. Now she was the last guardian of a secret that had claimed her grandfather's life and nearly taken her own. "The consortium will never stop hunting you," Carlos whispered from behind her. His arm hung in a makeshift sling, courtesy of Vance's final desperate ambush. "Whatever's in there, they believe it's worth killing for." Maya nodded, remembering the ruthless faces of the men who'd pursued them across 3 countries. They'd murdered her grandfather for this map, burned down his house, and sent Vance, a man she'd once trusted, to eliminate her. All for what lay within this chest. She pulled the obsidian key from around her neck, the one her grandfather had pressed into her palm with his dying breath. The weight of it seemed to pulse with ancient energy, warming against her skin. As she inserted it into the lock, the chest hummed with a low vibration that seemed to resonate through the temple stones beneath her feet. The lock clicked open with surprising ease. Inside, nestled in faded silk that might have once been royal purple, lay 3 items that made Maya's breath catch in her throat. The first was a leather-bound journal, its pages yellow with age but remarkably preserved. The second was a small vial filled with an opalescent liquid that seemed to shift and swirl of its own accord. The third was a map, not drawn on paper or parchment, but etched into a sheet of metal that gleamed like silver but felt warm as living skin. Maya lifted the journal with reverent hands. Her grandfather's handwriting filled the first page, but these weren't his words alone. They were translations of much older text, written in a dozen languages she recognized and several she didn't. "It's not treasure," she breathed, scanning the pages. "It's knowledge." The journal detailed discoveries that conventional archaeology had never imagined. Civilizations that predated known history by millennia, technologies that shouldn't have existed, and binding it all together, a single thread that made Maya's blood run cold, the systematic suppression of this knowledge by those who feared its implications. Carlos leaned closer, his eyes widening as he read over her shoulder. "This is talking about the Spanish conquest. It says the conquistadors didn't just steal gold, they stole records. Entire libraries burned to hide what they'd found." Maya turned the pages, her grandfather's careful translations revealing layer upon layer of conspiracy spanning centuries. The consortium wasn't some modern organization born of greed. It was the continuation of an ancient effort to bury truths that would fundamentally alter humanity's understanding of its own past. The metal map showed locations across the globe, sites that looked suspiciously like places Maya had studied in her research, places where unexplained artifacts had been found and quickly disappeared into private collections or government vaults. There are more sites, she realized. This isn't the end, it's the beginning. She lifted the vial, watching the liquid inside swirl in patterns that seemed almost hypnotic. A single line in the journal made her hands shake, the last sample. "Guard it with your life, for in it lies proof of everything." The sound of helicopter rotors in the distance shattered the moment. Carlos grabbed her arm, his face pale. "They found us." Maya closed the journal and clutched it to her chest along with the vial and map. The consortium had resources she couldn't match, connections that reached into governments and universities worldwide. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated what her grandfather had taught her about more than just archaeology. "The river," she said, remembering the hidden route her grandfather had marked on his map. "There's another way out." As they ran through the temple ruins, Maya felt the weight of her inheritance settling on her shoulders. She understood now why her grandfather had seemed so haunted in his final years, why he'd insisted on teaching her skills that had nothing to do with academic research. He'd been preparing her for this moment, for the choice between safety and truth. Behind them, the helicopter grew closer. Ahead lay the dark waters of the Amazon and an uncertain future. But in her arms, Maya carried something worth any risk, proof that history itself had been stolen and the key to taking it back. The last heir had become the first guardian of a new age.